Okay, hello. So today is the 4th of June 2022, and we'll talk about four architects. Well, we'll begin actually with a sculptor, but he also built and had interest in architecture. We are talking about Donald Judd, who was born in 1928 and died in 1994, a North American sculptor. So let's read a little bit about him. Donald Clarence Judd, you see, born on June 3rd. He was born actually yesterday, so to speak. Today is the 4th of June. Was an American artist associated with minimalism, a term he nonetheless stridently disavowed. In his works, Judd sought autonomy and clarity of the constructed object and the space created by it, ultimately achieving a rigorously democratic presentation without compositional hierarchy. This was the man, and he also published theoretical texts, a very interesting man and very appreciated in the United States. His sculpture is indeed very abstract, very minimalist, but as we read, he rejected the label minimalist. So Donald Judd, here he is again, and although his sculpture was highly so-called modern, abstract, minimalist, look at the typewriter he had on the right lower corner, and the telephone. Well, it's true, it was in the 1990s something, or 1980s or 1970s, but still it showed a taste for the old, even for the antiques, although his work has nothing to do with the antiques. But I like this very much, the presence of old technology, and even the desk that you see on the left side, belonging to the so-called past. And here we see, the tools of the architect until the arrival of the digital age. An interesting man, Donald Judd, in his later years. And these are his sculptures. They could also could be named, furniture designs, but they are, I would hesitate to sit on one of them. They are kind of chairs, but they are very refined and aesthetically, subtle. And they are essentially, they are sculptures. But he was, at the frontier between sculpture and design. Another artwork by Donald Judd. Another one, you could say this is not art. Well, it is art, it's courageously useless. And I would say, at least occasionally, it is beautiful. And, it is crafted very, very well. You see the placement of the screws there, they are just dots of accidental placement, and the colors he used, and it's indeed a form of sculpture that is maybe not, very, very well received by the traditionalists. But the fact that he rejected minimalism, I think, is very telling. And indeed, I don't think his sculpture is truly minimalist. Although it appears to be so, but I like the perfection of execution. I like there is even, the chromatic aspect of it is important. And it's refreshingly belonging to our time. Now look here, there are just some boxes, right? But these boxes are divided then in various ways. So they are part of a series in which, with simple elements, he creates artworks of some relevance. And believe me, I don't think anyone here, including myself or starting with myself, could have purchased just one piece. This would go for a lot of money. Anyway, but look at the execution. Is exquisite. It's done with plywood, but high quality plywood, and it is art. It is art. Donald Judd. So again, I go quickly because we have a lot to see today. And again, I thank to those of you who are here. Donald Judd, Donald Judd, Donald Judd. You know, he was not as the superficial contemplator of the works might think, that he was just a simplistic, artist finding refuge behind an elemental geometry. No, he was a very sophisticated and cerebral, but also sensitive artist, and he even wrote important theoretical pieces. I mean, look at this. I think it's exquisite, and I wouldn't mind at all to have something like this in my room. It appears it's almost like a designed object for some utilitarian purpose, but it actually transcends utilitarianism. It transcends function, and thus it is abstract. It is art. Now, again, some might say this is not art, but I think it is in there, even in the absence of color in this case, it makes you think, it makes you even feel in a certain way. But I would understand if no one agrees, with being highly emotional vis-a-vis these artworks by Donald Judd. But he was a famous sculptor in the United States, and not only in the United States. This one we saw. I rushed a little bit to arrive at his buildings because he also built a little bit, and not badly, actually. And now this is design. It's a table, and there are two chairs. And well, you might say they are not necessarily extremely comfortable. Yes, it's true, but they could function as a table and as chairs. This one as well. And I keep saying to anyone that if you want to design a chair, it would be a great exercise, and a great even therapeutical exercise. It does you good. I know from my own experience. Try to make a chair, just take a pencil and the paper and try to conceive, to create a chair. It will not be easy, but it will be very pleasant, rewarding. Miss van der Rohe even said that sometimes at least a chair, that to make a chair is more complex, more difficult than to make a skyscraper. And it's true. Donald Judd, happy birthday to you, sir. I mean, for yesterday. But you see, he did all kinds of works. And these are, I would also say, they have elegance, they are subtle, they are pleasant to look at, and they are abstract, and they are art. After all, what is art? Now look at this. He built these things in concrete. I would call them perhaps asemic architectures, meaning an architecture which doesn't have a specific function, a recognizable function. They are close. I mean, they are architectural, but they are also sculptural. They are sculptures placed in a landscape, which could, if architects are, almost obsessed by use, by function, they could be used to an extent, but that's not why he made them. So Donald Judd, again, he bought a large piece of land, I think, in Texas, and that's where he built some of these things. And he also built some, large spaces, his, like a house and atelier, studio. The desire to build is planted, so to speak, in the human psyche. And these days, perhaps we should abstain from building. Sorry to tell you this, because of the climate changes and the rising levels of the seas and the melting of the icebergs. These are, I don't know, maybe this one is existing or somewhere existing. Someone contemplating the artwork by Donald Judd. Now look, he did all of these, you know, and I think they are interesting. They are challenging, you know. It's almost like they invite you to imagine all kinds of scenarios or all kinds of things, you know. And look at the, you know, even the shading, you know, the shadows at certain times during the day, they contribute to the, you know, the abstract lyricism of what we look at. I think they are very nice. Now he built this, and obviously he was doing well, unlike Vincent van Gogh. Look at this. When I show this, he designed the you know, the seating, you know, the armchair. But look at the window, which is also a door, you know, or two doors if you want. It's a good idea, you know. He obviously had the means to, you know, do some impressive things here. And you can tell it is an artist who lives here, but an artist and an architect, you know, a sculptor and an architect. And there are other examples like this, of course, in history, some of them quite famous. If we are to mention just Bernini, Donald Judd. Donald Judd again. No, of course, there are many artists who are not as successful as Donald Judd was, and you know, they barely can pay the rent to a very small studio. But this does not mean that we cannot be inspired by an example like Donald Judd's, and you know, try to do serious, deep, sensitive, creative work, and who knows, maybe the gods will smile on you encouragingly, and you will achieve that success, which will will enable you to do what he did here. Now we go to the second presentation today. Mosei Ginzburg, a Russian architect who was born in 1892 and died in 1946. So let's say he was born today on the 4th of June. But with the old system of counting time was the 23rd of May. But we use the present day system. It's the 4th of June in Minsk, and he died in 1946 in Moscow. Was a Soviet constructivist architect, best known for his 1929 Narkomfin building in Moscow. This was the man. And he is important for the history of modern architecture. You see him with this group of you know, other architects from that time in Russia, and that finger points towards him. He's right at the center. So Ginzburg was born in Minsk into a Jewish architect's family. He graduated from Milano Academy in 1914 and Riga Polytechnical Institute in 1917. During Russian Civil War, he lived in the Crimea, relocating to Moscow in 1921. There he joined the faculty of, it's hard to read that, but it was a very famous avant-garde school, Temas, I can't pronounce it, and the Institute of Civil Engineers, which eventually merged with Moscow State Technical University. Even now, the Russians have a very avant-garde school, Strelka, which means Jata in Romanian. Beautiful school. We need such a school in Romania too. Ideologist of constructivism. So he is considered an ideologist of constructivism. We remember that constructivism had a great impact on the deconstructivist architects at the end of the 20th century. Not just Bernard Tschumi, but Zaha Hadid was highly influenced by Malevich, for example, and so on. So the founder of the OSA Group, Organization of Contemporary Architects, which had links with Vladimir, I'm sorry, Vladimir Mayakovsky and Ossi Brick's Left Group. He published the book Style and Epoch in 1924, an influential work of architectural theory with similarities to Le Corbusier's Vers une architecture. It was effectively the manifesto of constructivist architecture, a style which combined an interest in advanced technology and engineering with socialist ideas. The OSA experimented with forms of communal apartments to provide for the new communist way of life. Its magazine SA, or Contemporary Architecture, featured discussions of city planning and communal living, as well as the futuristic projects of Ivan Leonidov. The group was dissolved in the early 30s into an all-union association of architects, along with the competing modernist group Asnova, led by Nikolai Ladovsky and the proto-Stalinist Vopra. You know, when I read these texts, I realize again and again that we need this kind of fresh spirit in our country too, and in the world in general. You know, if you have interesting ideas to communicate, organizing groups, meet at cafes, virtual or real, debate ideas, write manifestos, express yourselves. Narcomfin and the social condenser. This is what this person wrote, Charlie Clemoes, the social condenser. Now, derelict, Moscow's Narcomfin building was once a potent expression of the social condenser, an approach to building which sought to engineer a new, more socialist community. And here it is. I know that as Romanians, we are adverse to communism and socialism, but theoretically, at least, there were some valuable elements in them, you know, like the equality of all people. What's wrong with this? Why should one be unbearably rich and one unbearable poor? Theoretically, at least, things were not so bad. Unfortunately, they were applied badly, you know, in our country as well. So the social condenser remains one of architecture's purest experiments in social engineering. Emerging from the revolutionary ferment that followed the First World War, its essential purpose was to break down social hierarchies and bolster a new working class consciousness in its residents. Probably the most well-known example is the Narcomfin building by this architect. From 1932, so 90 years ago, was built. A block of flats located on the Novinsky Boulevard in Moscow, designed by Moisei Ginzburg and intended for high-ranking members of the Commissariat of Finance. So again, this was not actually and unfortunately built for the poor, or it was built for a social elite and political elite. The building's most striking feature is that none of its 54 housing units had a dedicated kitchen. Can you believe it? Well, you better believe it. And I was told by someone who was invited in Zaha Hadid's apartment in London, which was very spacious, you know, she didn't have a kitchen either. Instead, the building was built with communal kitchen. So a kitchen at each floor, a communal kitchen, laundry and creche facilities, a move which was intended to socialize the kind of reproductive labor that was traditionally carried out by women at home. Meanwhile, a bid to stimulate an ethos of self-improvement and a new, more socially engaged lifestyle, the building also featured the library and the gymnasium. And here it is. It was actually refurbished, but it had many years of neglect. It still stands, and Le Corbusier admired very much this building. The Narcomfin building echoed similar experiments happening at the same time in other cities led by socialist administrations. In Vienna, for instance, in Austria, the interwar period saw a tenth of the city rehoused in so-called Gemeindebauten, housing which aimed to transform the city's working class through embedded social and cultural institutions. So in a place like Rabenhof, located on Vienna's so-called Ringstrasse des Proletariats, residents had access to a theater, which transformed later into a cinema, along with a kindergarten, 2 playgrounds, and communal kitchen and laundry facilities. Evidently, the social condenser enjoyed quite a moment in this period, but it also endured in the Soviet space long after, albeit in a somewhat less radical form, especially after the Soviet Union took a more socially conservative turn under Stalin. Indeed, while the attempts to liberate women from domestic labor were left out, the post-war period saw the construction of many interesting new residential and cultural buildings, which sought to engineer an emboldened working class culture, particularly in the new socialist societies of Eastern Europe. After the fall of communism, however, the social condenser's fundamental purpose quickly proved totally out of step in cities that rapidly adapted to a more capitalist model of urban development. If they can get away with it, developers operating in a capitalist urban development framework will always build buildings which make little affordance for the wider social functions which the social condenser offered. So this talk about the social condenser, I think, is important. And perhaps you should continue the discussion between yourselves, because yes, architecture should have social concerns, and experiments are also welcomed. I went with architecture students to Vienna 3 years in a row, and we had you know, a collective or a common shared kitchen on each floor. And it's very nice, actually, you know. You meet the other people, sometimes you smell what they cooked, they smell what you cooked. Let's hope that smell is, you know, enticing. You could have discussions around the big, you know, heating machines, or not heating machines, but cooking machines. Anyway, let's not be too nostalgic, but what I'm saying is, don't take for granted any kind of you know, easygoing scheme and say that that's it. No, there is room for experimenting. So this building today, in this new context, it should come as no surprise that most residents vacated the Narkomfin building years ago, and the structure has fallen into a state of disrepair, despite being listed as a cultural heritage monument on the Russian Cultural Heritage Register. Now the building has the dubious honor of sitting on top of another less illustrious still list, UNESCO's endangered buildings. I think they restored it. Yes, here is still affected by time and neglect. Interestingly, things have recently come full circle in contemporary architecture's fixation with densification and the so-called mixed-use development, which bears some striking similarities with a social condenser. The fundamental difference is the underlying social reality within which these respective design approaches operate within. Whereas the social condenser, sorry about this, whereas the social condenser was envisioned as a space to realize a new, more emancipated working class subject, the modern day mixed-use development is overwhelmingly targeted as boogie young urban professionals. In other words, the former is exclusive of bourgeois ideology and the latter is thoroughly stepped in it. And it's true, there are mimicking efforts in our capitalist society, but it's not the same thing. Here it is, you know, refurbished and it looks fine. And it's indeed a monument to a societal vision, which is worth contemplating and exploring. Now we go to, so we talked about Ginzburg. And now we'll talk about, in a way, the very opposite kind of architect, Rafael Vinoly, who is now an American architect. Well, he was at the beginning too, because he was born in Uruguay. America is not just the United States, it's also South America, Central America, Canada, and so on. Here he is. He is not a bad architect. It's just that it infuriates me, his smile. He always smiles. This man always smiles. And I don't like people who always smile. I mean, is life so incessantly delicious that we have to continuously show our teeth? I'm not sure about that. But let's see his works. Rafael Vinoly Beseiro, born in 1944, is a Uruguayan architect. He's the principal of Rafael Vinoly Architects, which he founded in 1983 and has offices in New York City, Palo Alto, London, Manchester, Abu Dhabi, and Buenos Aires. Can you believe it? You better believe it. Vinoly was born in Montevideo, Uruguay, so to a film and theater director and a mathematics teacher, he attended the University of Buenos Aires, receiving a diploma in architecture in 1968 and a Master of Architecture from the School of Architecture and Urbanism in 1969. In 1964, he formed the Estudio de Arquitectura Monteola. God, I can't read this, but anyway, his name is shows up there as well. Architectural firm with 6 associates. He was one of them. In Argentina, this practice would eventually become one of the largest architectural practices in South America, completing many significant commissions in a very short time. In 1978, Vinoly and his family relocated to the United States. For a brief period, he served as a guest lecturer at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, settling permanently in New York City in 1979, so 43 years ago. He founded the firm Rafael Vinoly Architects in 1983. His first major project in New York was the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which was completed in 1988. In 1989, he won an international competition to design the Tokyo International Forum, which was completed in 1996. His firm's design was one of the finalists in the World Trade Center design competition. During the course of his 40-plus year career, Vinoly has practiced in the United States, Latin America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. I don't see Australia here. In South America, I personally like the most his early works in South America, and we are going to look at them right now. Fort Abad Museum, Buenos Aires, but this is actually a later work that he did in Buenos Aires, but it's still a kind of an interesting work. I hope I have on this presentation his earlier work in Buenos Aires, like this one, which was his own house. And I like it very much. I mean, who designed such a house today? Not many people. He did for himself. And, more than 50 years ago. Bravo to him. It's a building that stands out. It's courageously crafted. It's abstract. It's you don't even know what you are looking at. It could be many things. Maybe the least, a private home. And it was his own. I mean, look at this. It's black or dark. Dark gray, and that just has that. Canopy above one single window that we see. Interesting. I don't know what this is. So now we arrived. So we looked at his private house was probably in Buenos Aires or at its outskirts. And now we look at a housing complex, which is very interesting, very good. And I think we can compare it with the social condenser of Ginzburg. And to our own works, the Rioja housing complex in Buenos Aires, 1973, was commissioned in 1969 and designed by them, that group. The building was based on the 1960s Japanese design approach called metabolism. that made extensive use of organic growth patterns and of tree imagery, starting from a core construction capable of branching and expanding over time in a Buddhist tradition, adopting the organic imagery without the Buddhist overtones. The architects executed a number of metabolist designs. The Rioja housing complex was the first. The site was developed by the Bank of the City of Buenos Aires, a subsidized housing for 440 employee families. It incorporated commercial space and community areas, as well as private residences, giving rise to a solution that is a hybrid of two building types, the tower and the slab. I like this. I like hybridity in general, and I think for our time, hybridity is adequate. The two elements are completely integrated within a cluster of 7 18-story units linked by 10 bridges, affording both circulation and residential areas. It's spectacular, you know. It's in its freshness, you know. It has social concerns. It is some kind of a social condenser, to use the words that refer to the building built in Moscow by Ginzburg. But it's in terms of architectural expression, is very different. But I would say very valid, and in my opinion, is more refreshing and more so-called modern than many blocks of flats being built today. Bravo to them. Buenos Aires, the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s. And look what's going on. These bridges between the larger bodies of building are spectacular, interesting, engaging, provocative. They emanate a dynamic invitation to a dynamic life, to interaction, social interaction, and there is unity in variety or variety in unity. And I think they are such inspiring examples. They're really good. Better than many blocks of flats being built today, in my opinion. Maybe because they were animated by the idealism of the 60s, late 60s, which I wish would be somehow with us again. And unfortunately, it is not. We are so, you know, trapped into our little individualist concerns. We cannot build buildings like this any longer. We can't. And although technologically we can, but something is missing. It's missing the idealism of those years that these people enjoyed at that time. Yes, there are blocks of flats for all to see, but there is a different spirit in them, you know, a communal spirit. And that communality, I think we should strive towards again. Look at this. This is good architecture. It's interesting, it's engaging, it's cultural, it's vigorous, it has verve, it has joie de vivre, it has unity. People are united by those bridges. You know you belong to a community, and that's very important. And again, the bridges are extremely meaningful and important for this complex of apartment buildings. Argentina has brilliant architects, you know, not just brilliant soccer players or football players or writers. It has incredible architects, Argentina, even in the present. Now, the Bank of the City of Buenos Aires, even this one, you know, it's from 50 years ago, but if this was built, you know, in Japan, or maybe even in a lighter mood, so to speak, by Tadao Ando, everybody would have applauded that. Otherwise, you know, we don't even know about it. Vinoly's musical refuge. He loves music. He plays music, the piano. So let's see if I have pictures here with it. Yes, and here he is playing. I like something about him, the fact that he wears continuously or almost continuously 3 pairs of glasses, eyeglasses. One is for reading the musical squares for the piano. Apparently, he was even performing, and he has friends in the in the elite of the musical scene in the world. This he built on his on his own piece of land in the United States. It's a small concert hall, if I can call it so. Rafael Vinoly, born in Uruguay and living and working now in the United States. Here he is with his wife. Obviously, they are doing well. I mean, when you build so much and you achieve notoriety. Okay, we start a new phase in his work. He won the competition for the Tokyo Forum, I think in, I don't know exactly, in the 90s or late 80s, it was built. And is this building here? This is the building in Tokyo. It was a major success for Rafael Vinoly, a very large building. And, it was built. So participate in competitions, and who knows, one day you might win, but be courageous, be creative, be innovative, and learn softwares. Without softwares, I don't think today you have any chance to compete, to truly compete. So this is the building, a very large building. It's a conference forum, an international conference forum, a world institution located in Tokyo. So both buildings, all this, was built. They were all built by Rafael Vinoly. Look at the interior. It's not an architecture which has the lyricism and the poetry and the sophistication of, let's say, Carlos Carpa's work. This is a large body of work which celebrates, contemporary culture, contemporary world, even capitalism. But it does have vigor and it has qualities. Here we see bridges again. Bridges are important because the very first etymological definition of art that I read about is art equals bridge equals God. So bridges are important, not just to cross a river or I don't know what, but metaphorically as well, to connect. It's about connecting. So, he created here a street within the conference forum that connects two different kind of architectures. One with curved walls and the other with rectangular walls. Now it's exquisitely done. It's you can imagine, the value of the investment, and it's not just about the financial investment, also the intellectual investment, the creative investment, the emotional investment. It was a major success for Rafael Vinoly. There are even references, I understood, to the Japanese culture. There is refinement here too, in these rectangular spaces. It's a large building. The Tokyo Forum, Rafael Vinoly. And he's not, as you can see, and here we have structural elements that are different from some other parts of structural entities within the building. It's okay. Now, he is a good architect, he is a good designer, a little bit for my taste, a little bit commercial, but at times he does good things. 432 Park Avenue, it's a tower, it's right here, is this one. But he was also only a consultant in this project, but I think he did a good job. Aesthetically, is a building which is convincing. or maybe I committed a mistake. I know that Raphael Moneo did the same thing. It might be that the building by Raphael Vinoly was completely from the beginning conceived by him, and the one by Raphael Moneo, with which it has common aesthetics. That one I have to double check, but I think it's you know, it's not playing games. It's not an architecture with gimmicks. It's based on a square and square windows and so on. It's very you know, you might say rational, but I think it's very convincingly crafted. Now the interiors, what can we say? You know, air conditioning, large windows that do not open. For those who can afford, you can imagine how much an apartment here would cost, you know, millions of dollars. So we are talking about a different kind of architecture if we compare with the apartment buildings that we look at in Argentina, you know, from the early 70s. Anyway, but we are now in New York City, and yeah, it's a different clientele, it's a different you know, budget, it's a different everything. I personally like more, again, what he did in Argentina than here. But architecture, speaking strictly in architectural terms, is a fine building, this one. And it's yeah, it's crafted well in its you know, modernist language. So here it is, and here it is Central Park. And now, of course, there are many other skyscrapers, very tall and very, very slim. Anyway, there are spectacular pictures to be taken here, of course. But in this picture, the building by Raphael Moneo stands out, doesn't it? Okay, I could have shown other works because he built other works, but as a small introduction into the works of Raphael Vinoly, perhaps is enough. And now we go to the fourth presentation and the last one, this time a Brazilian and actually landscape architect, but a very important one. Was born on the 4th of June, Roberto Burle Marx, 1909-1994. So Roberto Burle Marx was born, sorry, he died on June 4th. I apologize, he was born on August 4th and died on June 4th, 1994, was a Brazilian landscape architect, as well as a painter, printmaker, ecologist, naturalist, artist, and musician. Those designs of parks and gardens made him world famous. He is accredited with having introduced modernist landscape architecture to Brazil. He was known as a modern nature artist and a public urban space designer. His work had a great influence on tropical garden design in the 20th century. Water gardens were a popular theme in his work. He was deftly able to transfer traditional artistic expressions such as graphic design, tapestry, and folk art into his landscape designs. He also designed fabrics, jewelry, and stage sets. He was one of the first people to call for the conservation of Brazil's rainforests. More than 50 plants bear his name. Can you imagine? He amassed a substantial collection of plants at his home, including more than 500 philodendrons, including some that were discovered by him or bear his name, like Philodendron Burle Marxi. Interesting. Roberto Burle Marx was born in Sao Paulo. He was the fourth son of Rebecca. Well, I'm not going to read the names of his parents, but his parents, I mean, his father was a German Jew born in Stuttgart and raised in Trier. The family moved to Rio de Janeiro in 1913. Burmark's first landscaping inspirations came while studying painting in Germany, where he often visited the botanical garden in Berlin and first learned about Brazil's native flora. Upon returning to Brazil in 1930, he began collecting plants in and around his home. He went to school at the National School of Fine Arts in Rio de Janeiro in 1930, where he focused on visual arts under Leo Putz and Candido Portinari. While in school, he associated with several of Brazil's future leaders in architecture and botanists who continue to be of significant influence in his personal and professional life. One of these was his professor, Brazilian modernism's Lucio Costa, the architect and planner who lived down the street from World and who collaborated with Oscar Niemeyer for the city of Brasilia. The builder of jungles, as he was called, in the New York Review of Books, interesting naming, now interesting depiction, the builder of jungles. Here he is with indeed, protecting his clothes with that thing which almost became a graphic or pictorial jungle in itself. Anyway, an interesting man. Copacabana promenade, the pavement landscape, large scale, 4 kilometers long, mosaic completed in 1970 on the famous Rio de Janeiro beach, influenced by Portuguese pavement. And, here is seen, there are a few tens of meters, but you can imagine, 4 kilometers. And yes, he brought sensuality, graphic sensuality to the pavement, and it's important to do so. Now, maybe even more so in Rio de Janeiro, because of the proximity of the ocean and also the spirit of the Brazilian culture and of the city itself. You see, it's very, it's pictorial. You can take pictures from above and, you could say they are paintings because he was an artist. That's what. Look at this. Now, why don't we do these kind of things? We most of the time we take for granted our gray sidewalks or gray everything, without any kind of design. But look, it's important to do something like this. And yes, you can do this if you get in touch with the artist within, as he did. In Jotim, Brumadinho, Centro Educativo, Marx, Centro de Arte Contemporanea. I don't think he did a building, but he did, because in his case, his landscaping is done architecturally somehow. So sometimes it's difficult to know if he, unless you read about it, and I didn't, if this building was done by him or he just did what is here on the terrace. I think he only did what is on the terrace, but I think it's, it's maybe the most important, the most interesting part of the building. Now, another park in Sao Paulo, 1954, so 70 years ago, almost 70 years ago, he collaborated with Oscar Niemeyer, the celebrated Brazilian architect. And, we look at this landscape and what do we see? We see joy and we see playfulness. And the joy and playfulness are part of creativity. Without joy and without creativity, without joy and without playfulness, you cannot truly create, in my opinion. Progetto Original, 1951, the buildings were proposed by Oscar Niemeyer, but the landscape was done by Burl Marx. Flamengo Park, a large public park in Rio de Janeiro built on landfill. This picture is not very impressive, but here we see in detail, again, the conjunction between the beauty of nature, the beauty of plants, and the beauty of the artistic intervention of this remarkable landscape architect. was many other things, as we read. A hippodrome in Caracas, Venezuela, La Rinconada. Again, you know, be an urbanist, be a ruralist, be an architect, be a paysagist, meaning a landscape architect, be everything, because architecture is about totality. Parque del Este, Caracas, Venezuela. Look at this again, you know, I mean, this, you know, properly framed, you can put on the wall as a very nice graphic work or pictorial work. Yeah, some of these, of the beauty of the design, perhaps you can see, you can feel better if you are there than in pictures. But still, you know, it shows the participation of an inspiring landscape architect to unite nature with the work of man. He obviously loved nature, but he added something to nature, you know, through the artistry of his artistic instincts. La Lagunita Country Club, Caracas again. Well, he did this. He didn't do the building. The building was done by Oscar Niemeyer, I think, but he did a landscaping, and the landscaping is, you know, assertive of the talent of its creator. Pampulha, Belo Horizonte. Now here is a church, a famous church by Oscar Niemeyer. I like this church very much. I hope I have a few better pictures with this. It's dedicated to Saint Francis of Assisi, a modernist church. The year, I think in the 50s, was built, and I wish we can learn something from the beautiful sensual sacrality or sacred sensuality that Oscar Niemeyer brought to this building, and Burl Marx to the landscaping around it. So this is the church. It's a church. Yes, it's a church, and the landscape is happily looking at the church, meaning the trees and the plants. Good work, good work. Here there are scenes from the life of St. Francis, painted by an artist, I forgot his name. And so, you know, you see the conjunction between the work of a painter, the work of an architect, and the work of a landscape architect, all courageously promoting creativity. Look at this. I think it's great. The structure is, you know, concrete, and the figurative, because you can recognize scenes from recognize or learn about the scenes from the life of St. Francis. Why is it that they were able to do such things in Brazil 70 years ago or so, and we can't in Romania 70 years later? Why? Cascade Garden, Longwood Gardens in Pennsylvania. Now he's in the United States, Burl Marx, and his love and knowledge of plants and horticulture and landscaping is obvious, almost overwhelmingly so. The richness of nature, of course, it requires delicate and dedicated and knowledgeable and complex maintenance, but it's worth it. You know, and we should learn to love nature if we don't already. So colors, green, plants are, you know, it's funny, you know, we call opportunistically the architecture of today, you know, so-called sustainable green architecture. But nature is not only green. And anyway, this is another discussion. I like this work very much. I don't know who maintains all of this, because this is even more difficult to maintain than a building. But look at the splendor of nature, you know, unafraid of color, unafraid of exaltation. Inasmuch as Burl Marx was not afraid to assert his creativity and his exuberance. So this work is in the United States. We are approaching the end of the presentation, alerted as it was, but an attempt to incite you, the students, to express yourselves as creatively and as courageously possible. This is a boulevard in Miami, in Florida. It was completed posthumously. Maracaibo Botanical Gardens in Venezuela. Unfortunately, I don't have pictures with this one. I don't know why I don't, but I apologize. This is done in Venezuela again. Sorry for the quality of the picture. I have to improve on this presentation. The Kuala Lumpur city center, Malaysia, a park. He designed very large park. So to design a park is not just to place some, benches equidistantly and to some, garbage collecting, recipients. It's much more than that. It's if you look from above, you can make a painting and then transform the painting into a park, as he did actually. Casa Forte Square in Brazil, Cascata Farm again in Brazil. Random pictures of his works. I guess I couldn't find pictures of this when I made this presentation. Anyway, it's a beginning. It's an invitation to further investigate. And what's good today, and which was not possible easily before the digital age, is that today, if you see this presentation, imperfect as it is, and maybe at times insufficient as an introductory offer, you can very well afterwards, if you are interested, study further on your own, because you can. You go to the web, you type in the name of the landscape architect, and you discover works, you discover new images, and so on. It's very easily done. Now, random pictures of his works. This is one of my favorites because it is very plastic, I would say, but it's not the only one. And he knew something about color, he plays with complementary colors, opposite colors. So he creates a tension, something dynamic, alive. This could become a park. It is possible that it was made to be a park. Yes. This one again, the same way. Why is he relevant? Because again, he brings joy and playfulness into the landscape design. He brings coloring, he brings abstractness. He's creative. And look at this. This is an artwork that he did. This artwork could be actually a site plan, even for an urban development, if we are to call it so. I would love to see such urban developments, to see the master plan to look just like this. Revisiting the constructed Edens of Roberto Burr Marx, the New York Times. This was the title of an article on his work, the constructed Edens. The Garden of Eden was not supposed to be constructed, but when we were banished from the Garden of Eden, we do have the chance to construct, Eden gardens or Edenic gardens. Here is where I found the website with this article. I'm not going to read from it now, from 2016. But again, those two words are important. Constructed, I don't know if I pronounce correctly, Edens or Edens, the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Eden. But in this case, it is constructed by who? By Roberto Burr Marx, by an architect, a landscape architect, a man, a human being, just like you and me, constructing various adders or eaters. Here it is an artwork that he did. I don't know for what university, maybe in the United States, quite large, isn't it? So again and again, he was an artist, and we need the artists in architecture. Here is Rio de Janeiro with a long artwork of the pavement that he created. Here is a self-portrait as a young man, determined young man to leave something behind, and he did. So when he wasn't making things, sculptures, jewelry, theater costumes, hand-painted tablecloths, he was collecting them. A small selection from his significant holdings in Brazilian folk art, much of it Roman Catholic in theme, is in the show. It was an exhibition. In a 6-decade career, he designed some 2,000 gardens, assisted in later years by his longtime associate, Haruyoshi Ono, Japanese, of course. Many of those plans, though arduously pursued, were never realized. That's it. Let's wish him happy birthday. That's it for today. I'm happy you participated, and I invite you tomorrow to